The Unseen Terror of Maple Street. Date and place, August 12, 2021, Maple Street, Carson City, Nevada. It's funny how life can take you places you never expected. If you had told me a year ago that I'd find myself starting anew on a quaint street in Carson City, I would have laughed it off as a fanciful daydream. Yet here I am, standing in front of a charming two-story house on Maple Street, my heart a cocktail of hope and trepidation. I'm Alex, a single parent, and beside me is my daughter Emily, a typical teenager with a penchant for art and an eye roll ready for my dad jokes. We needed a fresh start. Something to turn the page on a year that felt more like a relentless storm than a chapter of our lives. So, when the opportunity arose to move away from the chaos of city life, I grabbed it without a second thought. Maple Street couldn't be more different from the bustling streets we left behind. The neighborhood seems like it leaped out of a postcard. Pristine gardens, houses with porches perfect for lazy Sunday mornings, and trees lining the streets like silent, watchful guardians. Our new neighbors greeted us with smiles and plates of homemade treats, making us feel welcomed in a way that the city never did. I remember walking into our new home for the first time. The real estate agent had enthusiastically described it as a hidden gem, and she wasn't wrong. The house, with its charming Victorian facade, exuded a sense of history and warmth. The wooden floors creaked under our feet as we explored, the walls adorned with wallpaper that whispered tales of the past. It was perfect, or so it seemed. Emily was less enthusiastic. Teenagers have a knack for finding gloom in the sunniest of places. She missed her friends, the city's never-sleeping energy, and the endless array of activities. I hoped the new art program she was enrolled in would spark some excitement. But the shadow of change is a heavy one. I promised her that things would get better, that we'd find our rhythm in this new life. I believed it too. In those first few days, we busied ourselves with unpacking, arranging, and rearranging. The house, though charming, had its quirks. Doors that wouldn't quite close, a staircase that groaned under even the lightest of steps, and an attic that seemed to always be a degree colder than the rest of the house. I chalked it up to the house's age and made a mental note to look into it later. But then, odd things started happening. Things that couldn't easily be explained away. I'd find my keys in the fridge, or Emily's art supplies scattered in the hallway when we were sure we left them in her room. I laughed it off, attributing it to the stress of moving and our still scattered minds. Emily, however, didn't find it funny. She said it felt like someone was playing tricks on us. I reassured her it was just us getting used to a new place. One night, lying in bed, I heard it for the first time. A faint scraping sound coming from the attic. It was like the hesitant steps of someone trying not to be heard. My heart raced, but logic quickly took over. It must be an animal, I thought. The next day, I checked the attic, expecting to find a raccoon or a squirrel making itself at home. Instead, I found nothing but dust and old boxes filled with forgotten memories. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. The strange occurrences became more frequent, and the once comforting walls of our home began to feel oppressive, as if they were closing in on us. I tried to keep a brave face for Emily, but inside, I felt the gnawing edges of doubt and fear. As I sit here penning down my thoughts, I can't help but wonder if we made the right decision. Maple Street, with its serene facade, is hiding something, and I can't shake the feeling that we're not alone in this house. Hey, quick reminder, don't forget to subscribe and like for more videos. The human mind is remarkably adept at finding logic in the illogical, a comforting trait, but one that, in my experience, can also blind you to the unusual realities of life. This became all too clear in the weeks that followed our move to Maple Street. The oddities that began as mere whispers in the corners of our new home soon crescendoed into a symphony of inexplicable events, each more unsettling than the last. Initially, these peculiar occurrences were small, almost laughable. I'd find the television remote in the freezer, or Emily's sketchbooks stacked neatly in the bathtub. We joked about it, blaming these odd placements on our distracted minds, still adjusting to our new environment. However, the humor waned when these incidents became more frequent and, frankly, more bizarre. One evening, as we settled into our nightly routine, the air in the house shifted. It's hard to describe, but it felt as though we were not alone. The comfortable silence of our home was now tinged with an unspoken tension, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Emily felt it too. I could see it in the way her eyes darted around the living room, searching for something her mind couldn't quite grasp. The first truly inexplicable event happened on a Tuesday night. We had just finished dinner, and Emily was upstairs when the sound of shattering glass echoed through the house. Rushing to the kitchen, I expected to find a broken dish or a fallen glass. Instead, I found all our cabinet doors wide open and every single glass we owned lined up on the counter, untouched. There was no logical explanation. No earthquake had shaken them open, no sudden gust of wind could have orchestrated such a precise arrangement. Sleep became elusive after that night. Lying in bed, I would strain my ears, listening to the house. Some nights, I convinced myself that the soft creaks and groans were normal, just the settling of an old structure. Other nights, it felt as if the house itself was communicating, speaking a language I couldn't understand but felt deep in my bones. It wasn't long before the disturbances escalated. One afternoon, as I was working in my makeshift home office, the door slammed shut on its own. I stood, startled, staring at the door as if it would offer an explanation. When I tried the handle, it wouldn't budge, as though someone was holding it from the other side. Panic clawed at my throat, a cold sweat breaking across my skin. Then, as suddenly as it had closed, the door swung open, revealing an empty hallway. Emily was changing too. She became withdrawn, her vibrant personality dimming with each passing day. She complained of feeling watched, especially in her room. At night she would sneak into my room, her eyes wide with fear, whispering about shadows that moved in the corners of her vision. I wanted to tell her it was just her imagination, but the certainty in her voice stopped me. Then came the night that changed everything. I was jolted awake by a bone-chilling scream, Emily's scream. I bolted to her room, my heart pounding in my chest. I found her crouched in a corner, her eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. She was trembling, tears streaming down her face, repeating over and over, "It's here. It's in the room." I swept her into my arms, trying to soothe her, but the room felt suffocating as if the air was thick with unseen malice. In the light of day, I tried to rationalize it as a night terror, something I had read that teenagers sometimes experienced. But deep down, I knew it was more. The house, with its creaking floors and whispering walls, was no longer just a building. It was a presence, an entity with a will of its own. And it was making itself known to us in the most terrifying ways imaginable. As the days slipped into weeks, a palpable tension cloaked Maple Street, transforming it from a picture of suburban tranquility to a tableau of unspoken dread. Our once comforting home had become a labyrinth of inexplicable occurrences, each turn revealing a new layer of unease. The more I tried to ignore it, the louder it screamed for attention. The neighbors, initially warm and welcoming, had begun to change. Their friendly waves transformed into curt nods. Conversations, once filled with the pleasant banter of neighborhood gossip, now ended abruptly as soon as Emily and I appeared. It was as if an invisible barrier had descended between us and them, a barrier wrought from fear and suspicion. I couldn't understand it. We were the same people who had been greeted with smiles and homemade pies. What had changed? Curiosity and a growing sense of isolation drove me to seek answers. I started with Mr. Henderson, the elderly gentleman living next door. He was often found tending to his roses, a hobby he said kept him young at heart. One afternoon, under the guise of seeking gardening advice, I ventured into a conversation about the neighborhood's history. His demeanor changed the moment I mentioned the odd events in our home. His eyes, usually twinkling with mirth, darkened, and his hands, which had been animatedly demonstrating pruning techniques, fell still. "There are things best left undisturbed, Alex," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Some doors once opened can never be closed." The cryptic warning hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken meaning. He refused to elaborate, quickly excusing himself and retreating into his house, leaving me standing there more confused and troubled than before. The mystery deepened when I visited the local library. I had hoped to find some historical context for our house, something to explain the strange events. The librarian, a middle-aged woman with a friendly demeanor, assisted me in scouring through old newspapers and property records. That's when I stumbled upon a small article tucked away in the corner of a decade-old newspaper. It detailed the abrupt departure of the previous owner, a detail that had been conveniently omitted by the real estate agent. According to the article, the owner had left town under mysterious circumstances, leaving the property abandoned for years. With each passing day, Emily's state of mind worsened. She refused to be left alone. Her art, once a source of joy, now lay forgotten, replaced by a pervasive fear that clung to her like a shadow. I watched helplessly as my vibrant daughter retreated further into herself, jumping at the slightest noise, her eyes always darting to the dark corners of the room. It was during one sleepless night, as I lay listening to the house's unsettling symphony of creaks and groans, that the most harrowing event occurred. A feeling of being watched crept over me, an oppressive gaze that felt both foreign and intimately aware of my every move. The air grew thick, as if charged with static, and a cold dread settled in my bones. I wanted to move to flee from my bed and check on Emily, but I was paralyzed, not by fear alone, but by an unseen force that seemed to hold me in place. The moment passed, as suddenly as it had arrived, leaving me gasping for air, my heart racing. That night, as I held Emily, who had come running to my room, terrified by her own encounter with the unseen watcher, I knew we couldn't ignore it any longer. We were not alone in this house, and whatever shared our home was growing bolder, more malevolent. The feeling of dread that hung over us was suffocating, a prelude to something darker, something that was waiting just out of sight. And I feared what would happen when it finally revealed itself. The days on Maple Street began to blur, each passing moment steeped in a growing sense of foreboding. The house, with its creaking floors and shadowed corners, had become a character in its own right. Unpredictable, ominous, a silent observer to our growing unease. The once comforting walls now seemed to close in on us, trapping us in a web of unseen terror. I reached a breaking point. The need to protect Emily, to rid our lives of this pervasive fear, became an obsession. I wouldn't, let this unseen force control us any longer. It was in this desperate state of mind that I found myself knocking on the door of Mrs. Collins, the oldest resident on Maple Street. If anyone knew the secrets of our house, it would be her. Mrs. Collins, a frail woman in her 80s, with a sharp mind and piercing gaze, listened intently as I poured out my story. As I spoke, her expression shifted from curiosity to something akin to pity. She invited me in, her home a stark contrast to mine. Warm, inviting, untouched by the shadows that plagued us. Over cups of steaming tea, she finally spoke, her voice a whisper. "Your house has always been different," she began, her eyes distant. "Even as a child, I remember stories. People said it was cursed, that the family who built it suffered a great tragedy, a loss so profound it left a scar, a wound in the very fabric of that place." She told me of the original owners, the Averys, a family struck by misfortune when their only child disappeared without a trace. The parents were consumed by grief and despair, their anguish so potent it seemed to seep into the bones of the house. After they passed, the house changed hands several times, but none stayed long. Unexplained incidents, feelings of being watched, a sense of overwhelming sorrow, the same experiences that now tormented us. Armed with this knowledge, I returned home, a plan forming in my mind. I needed to confront whatever remained of the Averys' pain, to acknowledge it, to let it know it was heard. It was a plan born of desperation, an attempt to reclaim our lives from the clutches of this unseen entity. That night was the longest of my life. Emily and I sat in the living room, the lights dimmed, waiting. The atmosphere was charged, as if the house itself was aware of our intentions. Then it began. The air grew cold, the shadows in the corners deepening, stretching across the room like fingers. The feeling of being watched returned, stronger than ever, suffocating in its intensity. I stood up, my voice barely more than a whisper. "We know about the Averys," I said, my words hanging in the air. "We know about your loss, your pain. You're not forgotten. You're not alone." The response was immediate. A wave of emotion hit me, a torrent of grief and longing, so powerful it brought me to my knees. Images flashed through my mind, a child laughing, a family torn apart by tragedy, years of sorrow and regret. It was as if the house itself was grieving, its sorrow an open wound that had never healed. Then, as quickly as it had come, the onslaught receded. The air lightened, the oppressive atmosphere lifting like a fog. Emily, tears streaming down her face, reached for me, and we held each other, a small island of warmth in the chilling aftermath. In the silence that followed, I felt a shift, a sense of release. The house, our home, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, the walls no longer closing in on us but standing firm, protective. It was over, I hoped. We had faced the unseen terror of Maple Street, not with defiance but with empathy and understanding. In acknowledging the pain of the past, We had somehow freed ourselves from its grasp. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, I looked at Emily, her eyes meeting mine. We had survived the night, our bond stronger for it. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. We were no longer prisoners in our own home. The terror had lifted, leaving behind a quiet hope for a new beginning. In the calm that followed the storm of that night, Maple Street awoke as if from a long slumber. The sun seemed to shine a little brighter, its rays piercing through the canopy of leaves, bathing the street in a warm golden light. The house, our once menacing abode, now felt different, lighter, as if it had exhaled a deep, sorrowful breath it had been holding for years. The change wasn't just in the physical atmosphere, it was in us, in the way Emily and I moved through the rooms, no longer cautious or wary. We began to reclaim our space, infusing it with our laughter and love, dispelling the lingering shadows of the past. Our neighbors, too, seemed to thaw from their frosty demeanor. Slowly, the invisible barriers that had risen between us began to crumble. Conversations resumed, this time tinged with an air of curiosity. They asked in hushed tones if we had noticed anything strange about the house. It was then I realized that our experiences were not ours alone. Each neighbor, in their way, had felt the ripple effects of the house's sorrowful past. One evening, gathered in Mrs. Collins' cozy living room, a few of us shared our stories. It was a strange, almost cathartic experience. People spoke of subtle disturbances, feelings of unexplained sadness, and moments of eerie discomfort. As we shared, it became clear that our acknowledgement of the house's history had not just liberated us, but had somehow begun to heal the neighborhood's unspoken wounds. The most significant change, however, was in Emily. The fear that had once clouded her eyes was gone, replaced by a renewed spark of her former self. She resumed her art, her drawings now reflecting not just beauty, but a depth of emotion that was new, poignant. She made friends, some from school, others from the neighborhood, her laughter once again a constant soundtrack in our home. The house itself seemed to respond to our renewed energy. The doors no longer stuck, the floors creaked less, and the cold spots that had chilled our bones vanished. It was as if acknowledging the house's past had set it free, allowing it to become a true home. I found solace in the attic, the once foreboding space now a sanctuary of peace. There, among the dusty remnants of the past, I discovered old photographs, diaries, and trinkets belonging to the Averys. It felt right to honor their memory, to acknowledge their existence and their loss. I cleaned up the space, creating a small nook where their memories could be respected and remembered. Life on Maple Street returned to a semblance of normalcy, but with a newfound sense of community and understanding. We had all shared in an unspoken journey, a journey through the shadows of the past into the light of the present. Our experiences, once a source of fear, had become a foundation for a deeper connection with each other. The story of the Averys and the unseen terror they brought to our lives became a testament to the power of empathy and understanding. By facing our fears, by acknowledging and respecting the pain of others, we had found a path to healing. As I sit on the porch, watching Emily play with her friends on the lawn, I reflect on our journey. The road was unexpected and fraught with fear, but it led us to a deeper understanding of ourselves and those around us. The scars of the past may never fully fade, but in their place, new memories are being formed, memories of love, healing, and hope. Maple Street, once a symbol of our turmoil, is now a symbol of our resilience. Our story, a reminder that sometimes the most profound terrors are those that lurk unseen, hidden within the walls of our own history. And sometimes, the key to overcoming them lies not in battles and confrontations, but in recognition, empathy, and the shared human experience of overcoming the shadows of the past. As the seasons changed, so did life on Maple Street. The once ominous presence that had lurked within the walls of our home had dissipated, leaving behind a sense of peace that resonated throughout the neighborhood. Our house, with its Victorian charm and creaking floors, had become a true home, a sanctuary filled with love and laughter, a far cry from the shadowed, oppressive structure it had once been. I often found myself reflecting on our journey, the path that had led us from fear to understanding, from isolation to a profound sense of community. The experience had changed us, not just as individuals, but as a part of something larger. There was a newfound depth to our interactions with our neighbors, conversations now laced with an unspoken understanding and mutual respect born from shared experiences. Emily, who had once been consumed by fear, had blossomed in ways I could never have imagined. Her art, once a means of escape, had become a form of expression that captured the beauty and complexity of our experiences. She had grown, not just in age but in wisdom and strength, her resilience a source of pride that filled my heart. The neighborhood itself seemed to have undergone a transformation. Gardens bloomed brighter, laughter echoed more freely, and there was a sense of togetherness that had been absent before. It was as if our collective confrontation with the past had breathed new life into the present, knitting us closer together. I learned, through our journey, the power of facing one's fears, not with hostility but with empathy and a desire to understand. The unseen terror that had once haunted us was, in many ways, a manifestation of unacknowledged pain, a reminder that the past, if left to fester, can cast long shadows over the present. By acknowledging and respecting the Averys' tragedy, we had not only set ourselves free, but had also given them peace. Our story had become a part of Maple Street's tapestry, a thread woven into the fabric of the neighborhood's history. Newcomers to the street would sometimes hear it, a tale told over backyard fences or shared in hushed tones during neighborhood gatherings. It was a story that spoke of mystery and fear, but more importantly, of healing and reconciliation. As the end of the year approached, we decided to host a gathering for the neighborhood. It was a celebration of sorts, a way to mark the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The house was filled with the sounds of conversation and laughter, the warmth of shared stories and experiences creating a cozy atmosphere that extended to every corner of the room. Looking around at the faces, some now familiar friends, others still acquaintances, I realized how much we had all grown. We had been brought together by circumstance, but we had stayed together through choice, a choice to support, understand, and care for one another. That night, as the last guest left and Emily and I sat in the quiet aftermath, I felt a profound sense of contentment. We had faced our fears, tackled the unknown, and come out stronger. The journey had been unexpected, fraught with challenges and fears, but it had led us to a deeper connection with our past, with each other, and with the community around us. Maple Street, once just a location, had become a part of our identity, a testament to our journey. The house, a silent witness to our struggles and triumphs, stood as a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit. Our story, a blend of fear and courage, loss and discovery, had come to its close, leaving us with a sense of peace and a readiness to embrace whatever lay ahead. In the quiet of our home, with the past finally at rest, we looked to the future, hopeful and unafraid, ready to write new stories in the chapters of our lives. Maple Street, with its leafy canopy and friendly faces, was no longer just a place we lived. It was our home, a haven where we had learned the true meaning of strength, healing, and the enduring power of empathy. We have come to the end of our story. Subscribe and like the video so as not to miss the videos that we will upload in the future. Tell me, what do you think about this story in the comments? I'll see you in the next story.